I want to let everybody in the room know about a paper that New America just released yesterday, and I hope that you picked it up on your way in. It's Getting in Sync, Revamping Licensing and Preparation for Teachers in Pre-K, Kindergarten, and the Early Grades. This is a paper that's looking at that the pre-K third piece of the birth through third grade alignment, but we're trying to provide some more information about what's lacking in terms of the preparation that a lot of teachers in the early grades or in kindergarten are getting, and to put some ideas on the table about how to make some changes there. So I wanted to bring it up now because I think it's a good segue to our next panel here. I just want to say, Laura Bornfriend, who is our policy analyst, and she's at the front, is the author of this. So she did a fabulous job pulling it together. So welcome, everybody. Thank you. And I think that Linda's coming in as we speak. So I just thought that last panel was really fabulous as a way to, I mean, first, it can seem incredibly overwhelming, all the different pieces that have to come together. And at the same time, the fact that we can start talking about them and get some ideas even from those, Harriet and Hetty and others in attendance here on how to make things a little more seamless and try to get around some of these problems. I think that speaks really well to what lies before us and the ability to start making some changes happen. I'm really excited about this panel, and I want to say that one of the folks on this panel, Betty Hyde, who is at the very end there, she covers the waterfront, and at one point I had her on the original first panel because I said, oh, the state perspective, we'll get Betty in there for that. So I say that because I think that Albert's point about bringing in how states can be a part of this, and to Harriet's as well, is an important one. And I also wanted you, Betty, to know that if there's a moment where you want to swerve away from, well, actually, of course, it's all knitted together, but go to the funding issue for a moment, please do, because I think that people in the room would be very interested to hear about Washington State and what how it's serving as a role at the state, how the departments there at the state level are playing a big role in driving some reforms. We are going to have another really robust discussion here. I'm going to quickly introduce everybody, and then I'm going to bring up our moderator for this, Kelly Pollitt from the National Association of Elementary School Principals. But before I talk a little bit about Kelly, let me just tell you about the folks in front of us here. I think many of you in the room do know them, but some might be some new faces as well. So I'm going to start by introducing Carrie Stultz, who is the Early Childhood Coordinator in the Alexandria City Public Schools. And for those of you who know me, you know that I have children in the Alexandria City Public Schools. And so you might say, oh, Lisa, she's just bringing in her own people here. But honestly, when I learned from Carrie about what she's doing there only because of my role here at New America. It's something that's kind of a quiet revolution that's happening in the city of Alexandria and that not many parents may even be fully aware of. Carrie has helped to build out a pre-K through second or pre-K, maybe through third grade school within one of the elementary schools in Alexandria City, and it's there are challenges that come with that, and I want Carrie to have some time to talk a little bit about what that's meant and how to do that within a city school district. Alexandria City is actually a city school district that does have a lot of challenges and is, even though there's a high level of affluence in our city, there's also a lot of poverty. So that's important to note. Bridget Hamre is with us here from the University of Virginia and the Center for Advanced Study in Teaching and Learning. And I'm thrilled that Bridget's on this panel because she will bring us up to date on the class, the Classroom Assessment Scoring System. I'm sorry if I messed up the acronym there, but and how it can be used to really inform discussions on what quality teaching looks like and how that can be used across this spectrum that we're talking about here. Linda Espinosa is really, it's amazing to have her on this panel because we also co-opted her for a journalism seminar we did yesterday. So I got double duty out of Linda and brought her in from, actually, where are you? Are you, Linda? Are you in Colorado now, Linda?
I was in New York.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
So we wanted to take advantage of her for 2 days in a row, and she has just an amazing body of work, as many of you know, on working with diverse learners, dual language learners, families that may be speaking a different language at home and then are kind of brought into systems that may not mesh well with what are best for young children who are learning two languages. And then, as I mentioned, Betty Hyde with the in Washington State in their Department of Early Learning there. So I am going to turn the podium over now to Kelly Pollitt, who has become a really great kind of co-pilot on some of these issues with me. Kelly has been helping NAESP to really address and grapple with at a deep level some of these alignment issues. And many of you may not know, and Kelly can tell you a little bit more, but the NAESP's foundation convened a task force last fall, and we met several times. I was a member of it, and we will be continuing to meet, I understand, to really try to get at what, not just what principals need to do a better job of aligning and thinking through the early childhood years up through third grade, but also how the foundation and the association can be a resource to policymakers and providing some ideas for what should happen at the state level, what should happen at the federal level in really trying to grapple with some of the problems that we were talking about, say, in the last panel. So I'm now going to turn it over to Kelly, and thank you all for your attention, and thanks to Kelly for moderating the panel.
Thanks, Lisa. First of all, I want to commend you for bringing together such a phenomenal group of folks here today, certainly to our esteemed panelists. And I think one of the things that I'm most wanting to talk about today is that I'm here on behalf of the K-12 community. And one of the issues, as we try to wrap our heads around early childhood and this issue of continuum and alignment and systems building, is where's the K-12 community? Where are we with the early childhood community? How do we bring these folks together who have typically worked in a siloed community? And what is the best way to do that? What does it look like? One of the things, and you know, I come from a policy background, and I will say I have, I'm the mother of a 4-year-old right now in preschool. So I've been looking at these issues and talking very closely with teachers, early childhood educators, principals, out in the field, and really trying to understand what are these deeper issues that we have to get at. I mean, there are, if you really want to talk about it, there are pink elephants in the room. So we need to get at those, and that's what NASP is all about now. We are trying to take the lead on making a difference and bringing these two very siloed communities together. And, you know, as I said, I have a policy background, and one of the other issues is that helping people really understand what are the issues that folks face in the policy setting. How do we get at those? How do we better inform? How do we make, we have a whole new regime. We have 87 new members of Congress who have no idea about early childhood education. They have no backgrounds. So how do we begin to educate them? We need to educate the educators, right? So that's what really where we're taking the lead, and we need to be at the forefront, I believe, because of the critical role that the principal plays and bringing the community, really the early learning community and the whole learning community together. So, you know, I think that's why Lisa and I have such a strong partnership here is, you know, we're really getting at the tough issues. And that's what we want to talk about, and that's what we need to face if we're really going to address the issues in early childhood. So, you know, I sort of want to pose that to our panelists here. We have a very esteemed guest here who, we have the research background, we have the practitioners, but how do we put the research. What we, I always say, we have the how, but not, or the what, but not the how. How do we do this? How do we really get the folks who are in the field with the information, but how to do it? I always say you can't put the cart before the horse. One of the things that we're working on is really instilling in ESEA and other areas professional development for principals and other administrators and teachers on early childhood education. What does a developmentally appropriate classroom look like? If you have a pre-K classroom in your school building, are you paying attention to that? Do you understand what it means? And how far up does that go? Are we pushing the curriculum down? Are we being too hard on these kids? Are we not understanding the social emotional development needs of kids? So I think those are issues that we need to take a really hard look at. And as Lisa alluded to, we are, before we get into the panel discussion, we are launching a new task force. We're continuing the work of the task force so that we can continue to talk about these issues so that people can start to get their heads wrapped around this issue and really start to understand what it means. One of the things that we've encountered coming from the K-12 community is that we have a problem with language. Folks in the early childhood development community have a very different language. And so there's a need now to really help understand what those terminologies mean. What is a continuum? What does transition mean? What does the word alignment mean? You can tell people what they should be doing, but if they don't know how to do it, that causes a problem. So I'm going to turn it over to our panel, and one of the first questions that I thought that, sort of segueing from that notion is, what does it mean? What does the word alignment mean? What does the word continuum mean? And what should it look like? And how should K-12 be working with the early childhood community in the best way possible to bring folks together? And I think that's the question that we're really grappling with.
Well, I'll start. Your comment about language actually made me reflect on something that some of you in this room have probably heard me say before, but the sort of moment I realized when things were really broken was a moment when somebody from an unnamed state called, was interested, they worked in a Department of Education, interested in using the class as a part of their quality rating and improvement system, but within the Department of Ed. And the conversation went like this. How would you feel about changing the name of emotional support? Because in this state, the department, sometimes I think I'm making the story up, but I'm really not. The Department of Education is really not allowed to use that word. It's sort of owned by Health and Human Services in this state. So it would be much better for us if we could just call it, say, social support. And I think that experience sort of speaks very loudly to the level and degree of challenges that we have and these issues of language and the barriers that language can sort of place as we sort of fight to define what this continuum may be. People who've heard me talk know I rarely talk without video, and I don't have video, so I feel a little handicapped. So I think as I think about this issue of what is the sort of continuum and what does alignment look like, I'll try to paint a little picture. So we have recently been thinking a lot about infants, and it's not something that we were thinking about before, but for a variety of reasons we've been thinking a lot about infants. And so the picture that I paint of infants is a caregiver sitting with two children in their little bouncy seats where they're babbling and she's babbling back, repeating what they're saying, maybe doing some little extensions. Okay, so that's one view. Now let's go to the other end of that continuum that we're talking about and talk about a third grade classroom where a teacher is sitting with a group of students in a small reading group and they're having a discussion. So if I showed those videos to the vast majority of, I'll pick on elementary school principals, and said, what do you see that's similar? That would be a really hard question for them to answer. I expect that within this room it's sort of obvious to those of us in this room, but I think a part of our challenge is how do we make that more obvious to the early childhood professionals, an infant caregiver, to see how these early interactions that she's having with children are completely and totally related to third grade reading. And how do we help the third grade teacher understand that, that development is a continuum. And so I think that a part of what we've tried to do with the class, and I always say this isn't about class, it's not about the tool. I think the class is just one tool, and there are many that could be used to do this. But is to sort of frame, there's sort of a child development continuum, but there's also a continuum of interactions. And I think to the extent we can help build a common language about the quality of interactions, regardless of whether it's infant care or in a third grade classroom, that can be very, very powerful. And in fact, we even have a little bit of data recently suggesting that this idea of sort of people's mental framework for understanding what practice is and their ability to see it and describe it in very specific ways is actually related to what they do in the classroom. So I think there's real value to us sort of pushing on both ends of this continuum, and we see interactions as a really great place to start, because I think it's much easier to define commonalities of interactions across this continuum than to start talking about things like curriculum. So we also need to be talking about curricular alignment, but sometimes those things just seem so different. I think interactions are a nice place to start. So.
Well, actually, I was prepared to answer the question, what is quality in classrooms that have dual language learning? But you know what? That's okay, because when you said continuum and alignment, what it made me think of was that to a certain extent, I think in early childhood education, we need to think about this differently for children who are dual language learners, because what my hope is that we will not repeat the mistakes of bilingual education in K-12. So I'm thinking that we need to blaze a whole new trail about what does quality, high quality look like for children who enter our programs whose families speak a language other than English. And it's not always consistent with what has been promoted for bilingual education for K-12. Some of the features of quality, in fact, are different, because the young child's brain is different around language development than, say, a 6, 7, 8-year-old child's brain, and their ability to absorb and benefit from a language of instruction that they don't understand, for instance. But let me just throw this out, because I think, first of all, when we talk about what is quality for young dual language learners, I think we need to accept the fact that this is a relatively recent science. So we really are just kind of discovering what are the practices that contribute to both short-term development and growth and long-term achievement in English, because that has to be the goal. You work with K-12, and we have to be able to demonstrate that we're providing the foundations that these children will be able to read and comprehend English by the end of 3rd grade, by 4th grade, stay in school, take the SAT successfully in English, etc. So what we have been learning is actually, and I would say a lot of the really significant research is probably in the last 5 to 7 years about what that looks like in terms of oral language development. For instance, and I don't know, I mean, I've been looking at this literature fairly carefully, for the last 15 years or so, but what we know, we've done some research in Los Angeles Unified School District, but people across the country are finding the same thing, which is that English language learners tend to score equivalently or sometimes even better than their native English-speaking peers on aspects of decoding. They are learning those word attack skills because many of them are subjected to very structured language arts instruction programs. And in our study, it was like they were at the 85th percentile in terms of their peers. Noni Lasso from Harvard's finding the same thing across the whole country. That is not the issue. The issue is that dual language learners, when it comes to about 2nd and 3rd grade, are starting to test at about a standard deviation to 2 standard deviations below the norm on comprehension. And it's the oral language, the very specific, systematic attention to oral language, and not just talking at kids. I mean, that's the other thing that I see a lot, is that teachers are talking at kids and expecting them to absorb those features of the English language, when in fact you have to give them opportunities to talk, to practice, to do this, very carefully set up your environments so that they can practice their emerging capabilities in both languages across the classroom context. So I think the exciting news is we're really and what you mentioned, the how, about a year and a half ago, that was my big aha moment after going through many, many classrooms, which is we don't have good procedural knowledge on the big points in terms of supporting home language, explicitly activating the knowledge children have in whatever language they have it, and applying it as they're acquiring English. These things are all extremely important, and we know facilitate long-term language acquisition and achievement. What we didn't have was really good procedural knowledge. What does it mean? You'll probably read in any policy report that you pick up. Strategic use of the home language. Okay, if you give this to a preschool teacher, are they going to know what that means, when to use it, who should use it? Do you use it instructionally? Do you use it just to help to nurture children, which is what we pretty much have found? Mm-hmm. So what we've designed in California, actually, for this new, it's a pre-K program that we're actually calling transitional kindergarten, but it's really a pre-K program, a year before kindergarten, are some very specific strategies and then training teachers on how to support home language even when you're a monolingual English-speaking teacher, and then apply that knowledge as that child is learning both the concepts, the preschool content, which they have to learn. They are acquiring English, and our goal is also to support the ongoing development of the home language. But how do you, it's the how. And that's what we have in this little program that we're calling personalized oral language learning, because it has to be individualized, it has to be targeted to specific areas of language development. So it's our POLE, personalized oral language learning strategies. And if you're interested, I can certainly share all the papers and all the information.
I just want to, comment on this silly thing. As you know from reading the literature you got, I am a newcomer to early learning, and I've kind of looked at it from both sides now. I've been in the position on the Governor's Cabinet Director of Early Learning for 2 years, almost 2 years, but I've had 30-some years in K-12. And at one of our gatherings with our ELL population as a superintendent, we said to the people, bring a dish, and that's what they brought, was an empty dish. And we take the nuances. It was like, oh no, there's no food. But I too want to talk about how, because I think how depends on the seat you sit in. Are you at a local person, an intermediate, a state person? So I like to come back to Washington State a little bit later. But for me, the how all my life, whether it's in this job or my old job, is the belief that you can't teach what you don't know. Mm-hmm. And when I was a superintendent, I would always hire principals that were instructional leaders or get them to become instructional leaders, because they have to know good instruction when they see it in the classroom.
But do they know what that means?
Probably not. That's why you have to do professional development. Right. So if you look at the span we're talking about, birth through grade 3, and in Washington State we have a 10-year plan for prenatal through grade 3, which is a little much for our governor, but she's tolerating the prenatal part, but certainly birth to grade 3. You think about what people need to know in order to teach, and we're all teachers. If you believe all the information about brain development, we are all teachers interacting with children. Within the K-12 sector, don't presume that your third grade teachers necessarily know what the kindergarten teacher is doing in terms of standards, assessments, how you communicate with parents. Some places that's very well articulated, other places it's happenstance. Within preschool, we talk about alignment, and what the heck does that mean? But I think you need to have your preschool teachers be aware of what's coming in kindergarten and vice versa. In Washington State, we're now working on some really good benchmarks to change them, quote, both ways. To say to the K-12 people, it's okay to talk about interpersonal development. That's not a bad word. And early learning people, it's okay to talk about math and science.
Language.
And language, those are not dirty words either. With infant and toddlers, again, one of my charges in my role is child care subsidy and licensure. And as I tour child care centers, I say to them and I say to parents, what important people you are. If you believe in brain growth, and these are the people interacting with children from birth to 3 to 5, every action they take makes a big difference, either building or not. And so we need to teach them how important they are. And then we need to make sure that that whole span knows about the different subparts. And they have much, much to share with each other. When I was superintendent, we had great success being very simple Very, very simple. And having people like today in the same room together, preschool providers, childcare providers, primary teachers, they sat around a table and learned, oh, you have good ideas. Oh, I can learn from you too. And it's a reciprocal back and forth learning. So I think there's a lot of very practical hows that we can learn from one another.
And I would just add that I agree that there is truly a cultural divide almost between the early childhood community and the K through 12 community in some respects. And I think we're getting closer to bridging that gap, but I do think it still is a real challenge. When we decided to create an early childhood center within a large elementary school, we recognized that it would just continue to be preschool classes over here if we continued with the same model with an administrator who was primarily a K through 5 administrator. And so therefore we sought and found a true early childhood education administrator to be the assistant principal for the pre-K through the second grade classrooms, because she understands child development. And I think that that's really a key. If we really want to make a difference with these children and understanding how they learn and how their brains do learn with different strategies than they need when they're in kindergarten through third grade, although I would argue that kindergarten still needs those strategies. But at least we are recognizing, and it still is a challenge. I won't argue that the primary principal's goals are to make sure that all of our children are doing well in third grade, and that is our goal as well. But how we get there, what that looks like, is going to be more dependent, I think, on using strategies that the class measures, really looking at that interpersonal, the exchange between and the interactions between the teachers and the children, as opposed to the more classic K through 5 direct instruction approach.
I'm going to pick up on that in a second. I just wanted to share a little story, and this is more for you, Linda. At NASP, we have a man called Andreas who comes in every night to pick up our trash. And he rides in on his moped every night, 5 o'clock on the dot. And he comes in, and I got to talking with him, and I'm trained in French, which is what I studied, but he's Spanish-speaking. And so we try, it's a Romance language, so we have a little bit of communication. So, I got to talking to him, and he asked me, he said, can you help me and my familia learn to read? So, I mean, he has young children. He has 3 children from Honduras, which is what I figured out a little bit in our conversation with my, obviously limited Spanish-speaking abilities. So I think this is, classical implication of what the investment in early childhood and how we help our children in the beginning get that foundation for learning and help them to succeed, because later on in life they're going to need it. So what I'd like to do is pick up on your...
Can I comment on that
Yes.
for just a second? Because every single family I've ever worked with, what they tell us as educators is, I want you to teach my child to learn English and to read in English.
Mm-hmm.
And every family has that as a goal for their child. And I think as educators, we have to be able to respond to that in a way that helps them understand and value their own language. Because oftentimes this translates into families not valuing what they do know and the language they can use to support development in a whole variety of ways. Because we do know that loss of home language has negative consequences.
That's why I speak with him in his own language.
So I think,
right.
I mean, because we hear this from families, which we need to expect, it doesn't mean then we help them shift quickly and overwhelmingly into English without acknowledging and bringing in and supporting the home language.
So I want to get back to your point about what the professional development can look like between helping to bridge this gap. That you talked a lot about bringing together the kids with the teachers and the families, but how do we really get to this issue of bringing together K-12 with the early childhood community? What would that look like? How should we be doing this? Are there, we have a lot of models, New Jersey, Virginia, you know, a lot of states are working on this, but what does it really look like? What are the kind of settings that we, I mean, are we talking about, you know, a lot of the issues that I hear from principals and others is we don't have release time. We can't leave for a week on a seminar to go to a higher ed institution to you know, spend a week and a half talking about these issues. We have enough on our plates. How do we really get to the, I mean, are we talking about, you know, one of the things that we're advocating for are peer-to-peer mentoring. And that's one way to really get at the issue, but what would that look like in terms of, you know, peer-to-peer mentoring in terms of principal development is different than peer-to-peer mentoring in early childhood in K-12. So what would that look like?
I have to look at the ladies that I was sitting at the table with this morning who are from New Jersey who are doing the training with principals, 4 days of training with principals on helping them to understand early childhood issues. And I think that you're right. It's not an easy thing to, number one, find time to do the training. Number two, how do you, it's almost a mindset shift that I think really needs to take place. I mean, it's not just, okay, I like the little ones and I'm going to, you know, have them in my building and aren't they cute, but how do I make sure that the experiences and opportunities that they are having in those classrooms are absolutely pushing them to a level, not that's an academic level, but a problem-solving, critical thinking, you know, I'm excited about learning, I am curious, I want to explore, having that kind of an atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Getting principals to feel that, to own that, mm-hmm. is, I think, a huge challenge that...
let me be clear. I'm not just here talking about principals. I think we're talking about the entire issue. So I don't want to...
And teachers.
You know, I have a propensity to do that just because of who I'm working with right now. But I think we're talking about teachers, elementary school teachers as well.
You know, this kind of discussion drives me crazy because as a superintendent most of my life, I have been absolutely, completely sold on the value of early learning. It doesn't matter if you look at longitudinal research, if you look at economics, if you look at brain development, pick your criteria. You know, there is sound reason to do this. And so the first panel was talking about how hard this is. Mm-hmm. And I think you need to have some buy-in from the top. Principals are high up, but you got to have school board, superintendent, both if you can, because then that trickles down to principals and it trickles down to teachers. And once you have that, I think there's very practical things you can do, both from a district and a state perspective. When I was in the Bremerton School District, we would have, as I said, simply joint trainings, and we did them in the evenings because teachers had release time for other purposes. Principals came if they were interested, and the people that kind of get it came. Mm-hmm. Childcare providers, they don't have any release time. I mean, they've got children all the time. So we had cookies and coffee a lot, and we learned together. Mm-hmm. That was so powerful because it was respectful. It was balanced. Mm-hmm. It was everybody's learning both ways. At the state level, we had an initiative a couple years ago where we had a lighthouse district where people could come in teams, principals with teachers, elementary teachers and elementary principals would come as a team and visit a school district that was modeling this, spend 2 days, spend the night, and not leave without having a plan for what they're going to do back home. You know, so there's, I think, very practical ways that states are doing that we could share with one another.
And you think those are pretty significant policy implications?
There are policy implications, but you know, it is like, I don't know how to say this, if people really get it, you've got to do it. You know, you have a choice. They'll have to kill you or something if you don't.
They don't get it unless they know about it.
Yeah, and once you do, you know, we right now have in our state a cadre of, you know, probably about 20, 30 principals that are just driven, and superintendents that are driven. And then they infect, so to speak, they pollinate other people as well.
Right.
So I think, you know, it's interesting because we're talking about the how and we're talking about professional development. And our sort of foray into this world, it's clearly, you know, one of the challenges is how to get really serious about how our professional development dollars matter. Because we can say, you know, there's not a lot of release time, there's not a lot of money, but it's a pretty substantial amount of money and time that's spent on professional development with almost no evidence that it actually matters. So I think that's a big leverage point. However, I think we also have to
Not to discourage our higher ed from doing that.
Well, in fact, and so I was going to say, I think we also have to think that's just one leverage point, and in the same way that we don't think you can start at third grade, we can't start teaching teachers about this stuff or principals once they're on the job. So I think that brings us back to the point we were sort of, at least Lisa commented on teacher education, and sort of the importance of really thinking very critically about what teacher education currently looks like. And there was a really nice Foundation for Child Development did work with InKate and produced a really nice series of reports on what would teacher education sort of look like if there was a better recognition of development. And I think that's work that is sort of foundational to the success of any of these efforts as they go forward. And I'll say one other thing that we've just been struggling with, so I don't have the answers, but I'll put this out there as another potential leverage point, I think, is so unfortunately too much of my brain right now is focused on this sort of crazy teacher effectiveness K-12 MET project, and you know, it's so the MET project, for those of you who don't know, is the Measures of Effective Teaching project funded by the Gates Foundation. It's a very huge project, sort of looking to define what teacher effectiveness looks like in K-12. And you know, and all of the new sort of federal dollars that are coming out use this word teacher effectiveness. So this is a clear point of leverage. And then the other half of my brain, as I said, is sort of with infants and in the world of quality rating and improvement systems. And these are two very different systems intended to serve different functions. So we can't necessarily create total alignment. But I think there is a need to get clearer in this sort of birth to 8 continuum about what are the places where those two systems could be aligned, and just the sort of resources that may be flowing to those two different systems. Can we be smarter about how those are being used to leverage them to create more alignment in this idea of, end of the day, what are children's experiences like, whether they're in childcare or in a third grade classroom? So anyone out there who has some brilliant ideas about that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, I'd be curious about your ideas on where those synergies might be. Anyone else like to comment? Linda,
Well,
getting
no,
back to
okay. I was just going to say, I think this issue about professional development is, just as we've had to examine the content of children's curriculum and the daily practices and how it's provided, we have to do the same thing with professional development. What is the content and how is it provided so it's effectively influencing classroom practices? And when we just did a mild survey, a quick survey of the general types of professional development that are provided in early childhood, they're primarily one-day workshops, you know, in which we know, you know, and as a professional developer myself, I mean, I enjoy meeting program people and going in and talking with them, but that is not going to have any kind of impact on the experiences that children have in the classroom. So I think we have to be as rigorous in thinking about how, and I totally agree with you, that it has to be designed to most efficiently and effectively use the time that we're asking people to take away from their classrooms, because we did Saturday things too. We always set up our professional development on Saturdays because we figured they'd be fresh, and made it voluntary. Because you know, once you start requiring things, you know, you're entering a whole different realm. But I think that's probably an unexplored area, although it's desperately needed because we know they don't enter the profession having the knowledge and skills to teach diverse populations.
And I think actually even further, you know, we find that even when people are pushing beyond the one-day workshop, so if you think about all the efforts in quality rating improvement systems, you know, most of them have now, the new word is coaching. So everybody has a coaching model. But in our sort of survey of what that looks like in a very non-scientific way, it looks pretty ugly. So, you know, not a lot of people have a model, not a lot of people have very much intensity, people don't have a framework for what they're doing. So again, we can invest all this money in coaching because people say coaching matters and it's better than a one-day workshop. But I think, again, unless we challenge ourselves to really be driven to show that these things make a difference, then it's, you know, it's not going to have a lot of sort of the impact that we want to see.
I think you want to make sure, you know, people return to professional development if it helped them, if they got something out of it. And people, teachers, early learning providers are busy people with time is a precious commodity. So if you make it very practical, we had some really good, effective professional development by simply having teachers do walkthroughs of other teachers' classrooms. kindergarten teachers in kindergarten, preschool, and vice versa. It was so practical, and you can always get a little trick of the trade, and people really like that kind of time spent very efficiently.
Can I say one more, just one quick thing about PD, because NCATE, I mean, if you have teacher preparation programs that are NCATE accredited, they are moving toward an outcome model, so that teacher preparation is not just about inputs. They took all these classes and passed that NTE or whatever exam, but in fact that they became effective teachers, and they're looking at the performance of the children in the schools that these teachers go into. So I think this sort of linking the both teacher preparation and professional development to outcomes for children, that's kind of a direction we always have to think about. How is this going to help children learn more and learn better? Because almost always when we do PD and you provide food and good time and all of that, people love it. They absolutely love it. Did they learn to be a better teacher? I mean, that's kind of the next level of question.
Right. How do we bring it into the classroom? So I'd like to open up to the audience. Whoever you get to first.
Actually, I should tell everyone we have Maggie in the back because she's also tweeting some of this.
I do. Advantages to standing in the back of the room. My name is Delisa Vargas. I'm with Fairfax Futures. A lot of the work that we do out in Fairfax, my organization serves as almost that private-public nonprofit bridge between the schools and the early childhood community. So we have two major programs that we facilitate. One is a school readiness team that is anchored actually with the elementary school principals, and we bring human service workers, kindergarten teachers, Head Start, early Head Start, as well as family child care providers into a setting that are helping children within the county and in those pocket neighborhoods of need transition into kindergarten successfully. Additionally, as the program has grown over the last 3 years, we include school-age child care in those teams because more often than not, from a services provision, the children who are in the Head Start or the early Head Start programs are receiving services from the county end up in SAC, in school-age child care. So that's where some of the continuum is happening, we find, from a heavy service base. But one of the interesting things in getting to the point around, I think, being innovative, we've started to hold some of those school readiness team meetings in the family child care provider setting. And what we are starting to see is that by dismantling what's going on in the different settings, we're starting to get more collaborative effort, and that the leadership does come from the principal more often than not, but that I think the demystifying is what helps create value for all of the people at the table. And I think it is unrealistic in these times, and in these budgetary times in particular. We are seeing a bit of a boomerang effect happen with our teams where the enthusiasm continues, but some of the fiefdoming is starting to happen because there are pressures coming down upon the schools that are very real, and they're manifesting out to the child care community. So I think as we look at how we value training and professional development, we have to understand the very real, disparate pressures that come to those two communities and that are based in funding.
Well, we certainly live in an era of accountability, and we're feeling those pressures everywhere around. So that it doesn't go unfounded, and I think everyone, and especially principals, feel that pressure, and so there's a careful balance that we have to strike. So, anyway.
Good morning. Is it on? Okay. My name is Marcy Young. I'm with Pre-K now at the Pew Center on the States, and I'm going to take advantage of Betty being on there to talk a little about state policy, and maybe Carrie can talk about this too in terms of what's happening in Virginia, because I think quality teaching is one of the most challenging and complex factors to influence with policy, right? And when we think about all the different pieces that come into play, this birth to third grade framework makes a lot of sense conceptually, but of course the workforce looks very different in different components, and we have a large segment, particularly in the younger, in the birth to 5, where a lot of our workforce is underprepared to do very basic things, right? And that looks very different when you think about what the workforce looks like in the K-3 world. No, disrespect, and understand that there's certainly a lot of things that could be done better in that world, but there's a huge disconnect between what those workforces look like, whether you're working with a baby, a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, or an 8-year-old. And when you think about kind of the policy things, whether it's college curricula, professional development, teacher wages and compensation, I mean, there are a lot of different components. So I'm just wondering, from a policy perspective, how do we kind of wrap our minds around all the different ways that we really need to enter this system, and what it looks, how different it looks based on where you fall and what your preparation is. And it looks so different when you're working with different ages of kids and how they're kind of organized.
We talk about Washington State a little bit. We have a way to proceed is to have at the state level a joint resolution with the various departments that serve this age range. We have just that with the Superintendent of Public Instruction, which is K through 12, Department of Early Learning, which is birth through 3rd grade, so you see a little overlap there, and our private partner, Thrive by 5 Washington. And when we both all 3 of us started about 2 years ago, and we looked at this whereas therefore be it resolved document and thought, what does that say? And then laughed because all 3 people were gone. We thought we perhaps should do something else. So we came up with a very structured, very accountable, what do we want to do? We developed an early learning plan that involved literally thousands of people. I mean, it was quite an ordeal. The governor wanted by December 1st. It is, 130 some pages. We have a summary of that, a 10-year rollout, and a 1-year, what are our priorities in this tight economy? And what we did is the priorities are the things that we share. There's about 35 initiatives. There are 11 things we're working on right now, and they are shared birth through grade 3. And they include things like make home visiting available for at-risk. Enhanced, we have a state version called ECAP. It's a Head Start. Early literacy, parenting opportunities, quality rate improvement, full-day kindergarten assessment, and so forth. But there's 11 initiatives. We meet every 6 weeks. I, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and the CEO of Thrive by 5, literally, the 3 of us and our staff, where's our data? How are we doing this? How's it going? Our governor now, recently, who created the Department of Early Learning, is saying maybe we should do a P20 involving community colleges and higher ed. She has always been an advocate. We had an effort called Washington Learns that was really committed to P20. So I think you have to have that partnership. It's probably necessary but not sufficient. You need that partnership saying it's okay down there, but then you need to have funding strategies, accountability strategies, and support strategies to make sure it happens in school districts, schools, and so forth, with families and child cares.
Can I just add just a little bit to that question? I also feel like that now as states begin to recognize the importance of evaluating and mentoring and providing the quality rating and improvement system, and I love the I part of that, and really emphasizing the improvement part. I think it's pushing us to all at least begin to use the same language and begin to recognize what's important, whether you're working with the infant and toddler, whether you're working with the preschooler, whether you're working with the kindergarten and first grader and on up. That begins to allow us to have an objective tool and measurement, and also to a common language and expectations. I think the whole thing has to do with what do we really expect, number one, for not only for the providers to be doing, but also for our children to be doing from the providers. So looking at it from both ends of the expectation continuum.
Getting to other
She's
questions.
working her
She's
way out.
finagling her way through the audience.
If we could, Kelly,
Yes.
what we did in the last panel, which we gathered 3 questions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Sure.
submit them together.
Right. We're short on
We have
time.
one from back here that we haven't gotten to yet.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia Rice from the Advocates for Children of New Jersey. I'm here with kind of our tiered pre-K third team from New Jersey. Kathy Priestley, who is really in charge of professional development. Hi, Kelly.
It's nice
Put
to
a name
finally
with
meet
the
you
face.
in face-to-face.
And Laura Marana, who is a superintendent in Red Bank of pre-K third, where pre-K third is, she's doing an incredible job in that area. We've been doing a great deal of professional development on the ground running. My organization, Advocates for Children, been doing pre-K third policy, but what we were finding is that, and listening to Janine, hi Janine, in listening was that without leadership, that will not happen. And so what's critical is that as our public schools go down with the ages of children, have become increased responsibility. We, I think, as policy people, were naturally thinking that by osmosis they knew what to do with these young children. And the reality is that we found in our work is that they don't, and and they want to know, but they don't, and what they think should be happening. And so through development of instructional leaders, through collaboration, we do great work with our Department of Education and our New Jersey principals and supervisors. We developed a program, and we're training administrators on really the first step on how to be more effective in early learning. And I think the point is that there are times in the rooms where you could see the light bulbs going off because these are connections. Why is it important that a principal who has kindergarten, who doesn't have a preschool program, begin to connect with the community? These are new ideas to many of them, and we can't underestimate the importance of laying that foundation for them. And there's some administrators that get it, and others that have not had that experience. So because of this varied approach, we need to make sure that in order to have instructional leaders, that they have to have this critical foundation. If we truly want to see P3 reform take place, we can talk about it on the policy level, but if those who are actually implementing it really don't understand it, we're never going to get where we think children should be by third grade.
I agree.
Hi, my name is Lindsey Callahan. I am a preschool teacher in Washington, D.C. in a community-based organization that serves children birth to 5. So I think, in listening to all this, we're ignoring a larger piece about teacher assessment. I have been to a lot of professional development, and I feel like there are things that I've been able to understand, but some of my colleagues who teach toddlers and infants are not even on that level because their education requirements are so much lower. And I know I have other colleagues who teach in the public schools and preschools in DC, and their teacher assessment system requires that students can regurgitate the objective of the lesson rather than be more involved in the lesson and doesn't prioritize social emotional learning or any of that. So I think perhaps, Bridget, you can speak to this. I really believe in class as an assessment tool for teachers because I think that it really focuses on those interactions which are so important for building children's social emotional learning, their curiosity, their motivation. And I just feel like a lot of teachers aren't even aware of what they're supposed to be doing, and administrators don't know what kind of things to send their teachers to because there isn't really a tool that, besides class, that people are really aware of to evaluate, especially on the birth and toddler side of things.
I think one of the real challenges is this idea of, what's the right tool for evaluation? What's the right tool for improvement? Are those the same things? Are they different? And I think, I'll speak for class. We have, several experiences with this, one being the use of class in the Head Start monitoring. We could have a whole conversation about that, which I will defer. And, I think that it's a great idea, but it all comes down to the implementation. And I think we're seeing the same thing as a part of this big MET project. And the essential issue is this, and in fact, we've had this conversation in relation to the DC system, which is an evaluation tool has really high standards for fairness, for reliability, for the idea that we could all come into the room and make the same judgment. Now, we work really hard with class to try to have a very standardized system that's very fair, but the reality is that the sort of other side of that is that classrooms are really complex, and it's really hard to find a good meeting place. So you can do something that people can easily get reliable on. I can count the number of times teachers ask open-ended questions, but that's not what's important. And if we just, if that becomes our metric, and I think this is sort of one of our critiques of the DC system, though I think it's very well, is that if you get down to the level of a sort of checklist, which in some ways it sort of has to be for accountability purposes, that drives the behaviors. Okay, you're going to come in and evaluate me based on asking 5 open-ended questions while you're here, so I'm going to ask 5 open-ended questions. I may not let the kids respond, which is what we often see, and I may have no idea why I'm asking those questions. And so I think this is just a real challenge for the field, and I think, I'll say, I think we're working in this space very actively, but it's a challenging space to work in, and we clearly don't have all the answers, so.
I think we need to one more question and we'll wrap it up.
He should have
the first question.
Hi, my name is Susan Oxhorn from ECE Policy Works in New York City. I just want to say that it's been really illuminating listening to all of you, and I want to move to Washington because you are, I just, it's very exciting. The Child Care Action Campaign, where I worked about a decade ago, did a report looking at partnerships between early childhood programs, Child Care, Head Start, and public school systems in 68 low-income communities. And one of the findings of that report was that superintendents, or prime movers, they really set the tone for all kinds of collaboration among, school district components. And we did a follow-up seminar for school superintendents in New York City, in New York, at Pacantico, and bringing together a whole group of superintendents from New York State, also some others, Inez Tenenbaum from South Carolina at the time, and also a wonderful superintendent from Vermont, Ray McMaster, who basically said that when a child is born in his district, a letter goes out and says, "Welcome to the class of 2020." So, these are, like you, these are people who are enlightened. And I just wanted to say there are a couple of themes that emerged, I think, from your discussion. And one is language, and that is we really struggle to define even what's going on. What is this? Early care and education, early learning, K through 12. I mean, there's such a lexicon, and we don't really all share it. And I think that needs to be really developed. And, I've been in the field a little while, and the kinds of conversations that we're having here, and a lot of you in the room have been as well, are basically just, reiterations of these conversations. So the lexicon really needs to be clarified. Number 2 is the principles of effective learning really can be applied across the spectrum, right? I mean, you talked about social emotional development being a dirty word, right? But basically we know that children and adults learn in the context of relationships. The Road Less Traveled, which was the report that was produced last fall, which I assume that you're familiar with, Linda Darling-Hammond and Sharon Kagan, et cetera, really looked at, adolescents, 15-year-olds, okay? So we're in the K through 12 system. And basically the principles were the same. They needed to be paid attention to. There needed to be focus. They needed to learn in a relational context. So where the rubber hits the road is in professional development. So that is where, if you've got superintendents, if you've got principals, directors of early childhood programs, teachers, all talking about this in really meaningful professional development, that I see as really the hope for this kind of the conceptual as well as the linguistic kind of embrace of P through 3, P through 20, as you said. So aside from Washington and New Jersey and New York City, where I live, there's a lovely kind of pilot program up in the Bronx that has principals having joint professional development. Lisa knows about this because we've been talking about this for months, with directors of community-based early childhood programs, and Dana Benzo is here. She is actually coordinating it at CUNY, along with Bank Street College of Education and Lehman College, et cetera. They are getting together. They are talking to one another. They're using Ellen Galinsky's Mind in the Making, so that principals can really understand the principles of effective learning for early childhood, for young students, but also really can see the connections. So I want to know about other models, because I know this is happening all over the country. I really would like to know what other models, aside from Washington, which is wonderful, are really are manifestations of this kind of really important work.
Well, I appreciate those comments. And first I will say, I think that's the reason why we've at least convened this 2-day forum, is so that we can come together and share more about this important work that's going on out in these different communities, so that we raise awareness and we inform not only the policy making, but just the community at large. Also, and just, I have to say this again, the task force that we'll be continuing to work on with NASP will continue to look at these issues and take a really deep dive into what's going on.
I just want to say one last thing. I know our time is short, but I just want to do a little shout out for what I think is potentially a great opportunity. So some of you in the Head Start world may know that the Office of Head Start is really revamping their TTA network, and one of the things they've done is they've started these new national centers. So we, along with colleagues at University of Washington and Vanderbilt, are a part of the National Center for Quality Teaching and Learning, and one of our big sort of deliverables is around transition and having annual meetings on transition. And Bob and I have this conversation on a daily basis. We are dedicated to making sure that this is not an opportunity lost. This is not just a bunch of money thrown out for, videos that people might watch on the web, but to really make systematic changes. So we are, I encourage all feedback and ideas for how we can use really substantial resources that are being invested in these centers wisely to really make a difference in this space. And I think it's a nice piece that can, easily be played out and used in other segments of the population as well, not just Head Start.
Well, thank you all to our panelists, our esteemed panelists, and all.